Welcome to the Along the Way podcast, your place to become an equipped and encouraged parent so you can experience God's absolute best for your family.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Along the Way podcast, a parenting podcast by Bell Shoals Church. My name is Tim LaPointe, and I'm here with Bruce Roberts, who's our next generation pastor here at Bell Shoals. And Bruce, we're talking about the posture of parenting today. And trust me, I think few people appreciate alliteration more than I do. So I love the alliteration in that, but tell me a little more about what that means and what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, so when we're talking about posture, what we're dealing with is really the perspectives and the attitudes that we bring to parenting. So a lot of times if we lack perspective, and it's easy to do in a lot of spheres of life, but definitely during parenting, when we lack perspective, it affects our attitudes, and we can run into the ditches really, really quick. So I think it's important that the posture that we bring is one that is realistic, and really helps with our relationships with our kids. So,
yeah, for sure. I mean, perspective is huge when we talk about parenting. So as we look to this posture of parenting, what are the attributes of that? Like, how does that play out in our parenting journey?
Yeah, so I think that, when we think about attributes, I think about two that kind of rise to the top. One is grace. The other one is humility. But I think that before we get to that, what informs those two attributes is the gospel. The gospel. So, and that's, at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to model. That's what we're trying to pass on to the next generation. That's what we want our kids to catch. And the gospel is a message, but it's also a message that comes along that's embodied, right? That's Jesus. So, it's a message, but it's embodied. So it has a manner in which the message is presented and conveyed to people. And for a parent, when we start talking about, hey, what does the gospel mean to us? The gospel puts us in a position, again, I like talking about it from the standpoint of advantage. It really does. The gospel was birthed out of conflict. It's birthed because there is brokenness. It comes out because there's fallenness in the world. That's why there's a gospel. And that's why it literally means good news. That's good news to everyone. It's good news to parents. So when we look at our kids, we can know that, hey, the good news that Christ is coming to the world because of our broken relationship with God. Christ is coming to the world, and he's done something for us that we could not do for ourselves. And he's also done stuff for us that we wouldn't want to do. All right, so he lived a sinless life that we couldn't live if we wanted to, and he died in our place. He died as a substitute in our place, a death that we would not want to die. And he showed that he's uniquely qualified to be Savior because he rose from the dead victoriously. And if we would turn from our sin, repent from our sin, and put our trust in him, man, that relationship can be restored. And that's what we embody. And that's the perspective or the posture that I think we should bring to our parenting, that the gospel fuels and enables us. The grace that we've been shown that has captured us, captivated our hearts, we can freely show. We can freely show to our kids.
So what does that look like to have a posture of grace as a parent? How does that play out?
Yeah, so I remember growing up, all right? And the reason why grace has to be present is because we mess up a lot. We're sinners, we're developing, we're growing, and that is exactly why God gave kids parents. We look at our kids and we're like, man, our kids are so needy. And it's like, yeah, that's why God gave them parents, because they are needy. Yeah. But if we back up and we look at our own lives and we're like, man, I'm pretty needy too. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty needy. And God's shown me grace time and time and time and time again. But growing up, it was not so much about grace at times, but when those mess-ups happen, when I'm trying to figure out something, when I'm stumbling along the way, sometimes it was just met with, you did this wrong because this was wrong, this happens to you. Mm-hmm. There was no covering up of the sin or someone standing in the place of it or a teachable moment or bringing someone along. It was more so, you did wrong and you pay for it. You pay for it. And And that can be paid for in a variety of different ways, but it's easy for that mindset. I think that's the default. That's the default, And if we're not careful, our parenting really can become vengeance, revenge.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you know what? This is what you did, and you made your bed, and you're going to lie in it because I'm going to teach you a lesson. And there are times when hard lessons have to be taught and learned, but the posture of that is not you just sit there. The gospel is one where God desires for us to complete the loop. Like we're coming back around. It's about restoration. It's about our development. It's about our good. So that ultimately grace changes us. It makes us different people. And not only does it make us different people, it makes us want to be different people.
Yeah.
And so when we're treating our kids in such a way that we're for them, you mean daddy and mommy, even when I mess up again and again and again, you're for me the same exact way? Absolutely. I'm for you. And I can be for you, and I can show you that kind of grace because daddy has messed up time and time and time again, and God's unrelenting pursuit of me has not changed. It has not dulled. So that kind of posture, I think, changes everything. It really changes how we see our kids. So.
Yeah, well, and I think when we look to Scripture, we see so many examples of how Jesus lived that out. And, if we're called to be like him, it's not just in our daily relationships with other people, but it's also even just as parents. How am I acting like Christ as a parent? The example that comes to mind in me when we talk about this is the woman who was caught in adultery. We see that in Luke 7 and John 8, and just how Jesus, it wasn't just that he showed her grace, but he still spoke truth to her in that moment. I feel like that's important as parents too, not just that we show grace, but also that we use grace to teach truth. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. It can be as simple as, when I think about it, I think about just wrongdoing. When you do something wrong, when there's an opportunity to discipline in a way that brings correction or something like that. But I also just think about just the posture of grace shows how we teach and how we approach things. I just think about, I grew up playing basketball, and, I played with different coaches, and my bend made me respond in different ways, because I'm, not everyone's the same. And sometimes coaches, they coach everyone the same. And sometimes coaches, they kind of get it and they figure out what motivates one over the other. And I think in high school, I would have said that I was a timid player because my posture was I didn't want to mess up. So what ended up happening was I messed up a lot. I wasn't free. I didn't feel free to mess up. I didn't feel free to try because I thought that the second I messed up, I'll be yanked or be taken out of the game or, yelled at or whatever. So I just think about when I'm playing with my kids or I'm trying to get them to learn something. I do this well on one end, we're trying to teach Roman how to catch a football, how to throw a football. I seem to have a little bit more patience when it comes to that, right? If I said, Roman, I'm going to throw you the ball. If you don't catch it, we're going inside. Well, that's a lot of pressure on a catch.
Yeah.
A lot of pressure. But to throw the ball, you drop it. Hey, man, we're good. Hey, let daddy move in a little closer. Let me get a little closer. Let's get some wins under your belt where you're catching it. Now, okay, hey, there's understanding, there's grace, there's an understanding. Like, this is where you are and you're learning. And now he's eager to continue to try, eager to continue to play with dad. And in the whole process of that, just that grace piece there, what's happening is our relationship is being strengthened and formed. And it's being strengthened and it's being formed by grace as a catalyst. But I'm not so good at that at times because when it comes to homework, dad has a hard time with grace sometimes. It's crazy, and so when we're doing, multiplication and hold on, you just, 3 times 2 is 6. And I said 3 times 3 times 3 is 9. How did you say 8. Like we're counting in 3s. Like in my mind, I'm like, how are we not getting it? Like I don't.
Yep.
And then my kids looking at my face, right? And they see frustration and like, oh, and truth be told, I'm probably not too excited about going through homework right now. You know what I'm saying? And now when I'm looking at my kid's face at this time and they're looking at mine, are they thinking, man, I really want to learn this right now. Man, I really want to lean into this. No, they're getting a completely different vibe from dad. So, I think that grace becomes an enabler for all of us when we're in an environment where we know that grace is waiting and that there's that it's not just somebody's waiting for me to mess up. We thrive a little bit better. We're free, and where the gospel is, there's freedom. We're free. Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think about if I'm honest, my wife is much better at times at showing grace than I am, and it's interesting to watch my kids sometimes when they may have a situation like you're talking about with homework. Maybe that's the example we'll go with. And if I'm frustrated that, maybe my daughter, something we've had lately is she's kind of transitioning into that homework phase, didn't really have a whole lot of homework last year, and I get frustrated that, you forgot to do your homework. What's interesting to me is that sometimes I find that when I have a lack of showing grace, my kids will tend to go more to my wife than they will to me. And I forget, sometimes I get really short-sighted just how much of a long-term impact my lack of showing grace can have on my kids. And the opposite way, too, as an encouragement, is that the long-term impact of showing grace can have on them.
That's right.
As well. It's just, we've talked about it in the last episode as well, just those small things that can have such a big impact. What are ways that we as parents can kind of think ahead to just trying to think of how to word this, but essentially prepare ourselves for those small little moments to make sure that we are showing grace in those situations.
Yeah. So what we're trying to do in some sense is make grace a pattern in our home, right? Where grace is so routine that you can kind of count on it, that it's there. One, I think, is just rehearsing the gospel for ourselves. I think rehearsing the gospel for ourselves helps us to get a right assessment of who we are. And I think that breeds humility. I think that breeds just a posture also of just being a humble person, just knowing, hold on. I'm a person. I'm a dad. I'm a parent. I'm a husband in process. You know what? God's not finished with me yet. And this is the way that my Heavenly Father is parenting me and growing me and how he gives me what I need for the moment. And then with that being rehearsed, I think, in our lives and us being changed, ultimately, what do we want for our kids? We want them to be changed by the very same thing. And it puts us in a position to model that well. And humility doesn't mean that we're just nice all the time and nothing's wrong and everything's fine. Or humility also doesn't mean that I'm just, I should look down on myself. I'm so lowly. I don't deserve to. I shouldn't be a parent. Why did God make me this? And as if God made a mistake by giving us kids. It's more of just a right assessment of like, this is what God's called me to do. This is His design for my life. I can do this. I just want to do this in a way that He's done it in my life. Ultimately, it makes the gospel, and it makes the gospel attractive to us. So I think one, just rehearsing the gospel in our own lives and seeing our need for it. It helps us to wait and to anticipate those moments. So when I talk about perspective and our attitudes, sometimes I think we get caught up we get tunnel vision, right? Yeah. We get so focused on something that we lose our perspective, right? We lose our perspective. And when we get, tunnel vision, we get in the ditches, and what ends up happening is that we act like we don't live in a broken world anymore.
Right. We
act like, everything should go according to plan. This should not be happening now, and we forget the world that we live in and the people that that live in it. And so wait for the challenges. Wait for the next thing. Those become the moments where you're going to get to show grace. You're not, those are the moments. And you being a humble parent, knowing that, these are things are going to go wrong, and I'm going to do things wrong, and all of these moments will be opportunities for me to show grace and humility. I think about, humility, allowing, if the gospel is our confidence, a humble parent, when those moments happen where something wrong happens with our kids, but something wrong happens with us at times, we mess up. We say things we shouldn't say. We say things in a manner that doesn't convey the gospel. We're maybe harsh. We're impatient. We're all of those things because we thought it was about us for a second there, and it was never about us. I think in those instances, the opportunity that we have to show the gospel when we mess up, not when they mess up, but we also embody and show the gospel when we mess up. And I think that a confident parent in the gospel can look at their kid and when they mess up and apologize.
Yeah.
And say they're sorry. Those are wins. I think those moments are wins. And, it's a little counterintuitive, right? We're usually like looking at our kids and teaching them how to apologize. Hey, right. We're trying to restore relationships between siblings or friends. But what we have to realize is that we are in a relationship. Mm-hmm. We're in a relationship with our kids. It's not just teacher and student and all that. We're in a real relationship. And when we wrong our kids, a posture of grace and humility is a great opportunity to embody the gospel and show the kids that, hey, we're in process too. Mm-hmm. We're in process too. And I think it helps our kids see us differently and want to lean into the God that we say that we serve.
Yeah. I was talking with somebody recently who was talking about their upbringing and saying, my dad got angry a lot, screwed up a lot. And the biggest thing that person said to me was that he didn't make it right, and that was the biggest thing was that he never came back and apologized or tried to right the situation. They were encouraging me, as you parent, we're all going to screw up. We're all going to make mistakes. Yeah. But the difference, the way that you can separate yourself is by making it right. I've seen that play out with my kids. I've screwed up with my kids more than I'd like to admit. Mm-hmm. But when those times that have gone back and said, hey, Dad screwed up. I should not have done that, and I'm sorry. It's so amazing to me how God uses those moments to sometimes give me the most intimate connections that I've ever had with my kids. And I feel like, as we talk about this and really the posture of parenting and that posture being from the gospel, it teaches me more about the gospel sometimes than sometimes any other situation that I might find myself in. So I think too, as we talk about this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. As we parent, as we go along the way, as we say here, I think one of the things we need to remember as parents is that parenting isn't just about us growing our kids, but it's also an opportunity for us to grow in our faith as well and have a deeper understanding of our relationship with our Father.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. God can do a lot of different things at the same time, right? So we might think that, hey, I'm here for my kids, but our kids are there for you. They're there for you, and God's using all of these things at the same time to mold us and to fashion us into what He ultimately wants us all to be. He can do a lot of different things at the same time, and that's why in parenting, it's easy for the wind to leave the sails. If you are having a posture of humility and pride, it's easy to be to really focus and see a lot of our failures and be discouraged by that. Because of what's happening, we kind of fall under this illusion that we have a little bit more control than we really do, and we don't. And I think that's precisely the point. And I think it's one of the lessons that the Lord teaches us in parenting is that ultimately, God, these kids are yours. I'm a steward of them. I'm trying to manage this. I want to honor you in that. But ultimately, it's not about my name. It's not about the Roberts name. It's not about the LaPointe name. It's ultimately not about Bell Shoals. It's not about those names. It's ultimately about you.
Yeah.
And your reputation and what you would want and what you desire. So when we can, I think the gospel brings that kind of freedom, and we can back up from a situation and know that, hey, you know what, God's using this for my good, my good as well. And that's why, in a lot of ways, and hopefully in ways that are directing us to God and His gospel, our lives will never be never be the same because of our kids. Mm-hmm. Not just because they're involved in our lives, but that's any kind of relationship where the gospel is at the center of it. Our lives should look so much different, and you won't be able to see your life differently apart from the people that God has placed in them, and that includes our kids.
Yeah, I love what you said there about just, we're here as stewards of these kids, and that's something that, as my wife and I pray for our kids, we try to be intentional about incorporating that into our prayer. God, we thank you that you've entrusted us as stewards of these kids, and I think the more that I pray that, the more it changes how I parent, because I'm not, like you said, I'm not parenting from a position of what do I want my kids to be like, but more of what has God intended for my kids to be? Who has God intended my kids to be? And listening more to His path for them instead of my path for them. Because if they go my path, it's gonna be a bad road. And as we get towards the end here, one of the things I'd love to kind of capture here of what we're talking about is, from what I'm hearing from what you're saying, the more that I practice humility as a parent, the cool thing is that it also opens the door for my kids to practice grace. Mm-hmm. And the more that I practice grace, the more I can teach them grace that they can then use back in that relationship.
That's right.
And
they learn humility in the process.
Yeah.
They learn how to, I think ultimately this is framed in relationship. And God has, he has this posture to us. Okay, so you can't improve upon the posture. If it was just law and God coming, hey, you messed up, Genesis 3 happens, ball game, it's over. Mm-hmm. Taking my ball and I'm going home. Like it's over. You know what I mean? That's not the posture. It doesn't mean that there's not order. It doesn't mean that there aren't consequences. It doesn't mean any of that stuff. But I think what God is showing us is that, yes, these are the things that have happened, and there are real consequences to that. But just as real as those consequences is the gospel. Mm. Grace is real in a broken world.
Yeah.
The hope is real. All of these things are real things that should be fuel. That should be fuel as we parent along the way and find ourselves in situations where we're not wanting to be quite like God has been to us. But the gospel helps us in those situations. So, I think in the modeling of all of that, our kids learn how to do that. And honestly, I think that in that, our kids will find the gospel believable, mm-hmm. because it'll correspond with reality. And so when mom and dad act like they have it together, that's not reality. And if we're teaching our kids anything and they're paying attention to life, they know that can't be true. They know that can't be true. And so if the gospel is only for our kids and it's not for mom and dad, that's not believable.
Yeah,
it's not believable. So all of these things together are great opportunities. And so it's not just content and data and information and Bible stories and all of those things, and it's void of human interaction and relationship. If that were true, then we would still be all operating off of like stone tablets, right?
Yeah.
No, but Jesus came, he embodied these things. He says these things are important. But what's also important and just important is the character and the attributes that fuel how the information comes. how it's applied in this situation or this situation. And as parents, as we go through that in our lives and God deals with us, we learn to be, wise and discerning and figuring out, hey, maybe this isn't a moment to bring this up to my child. Maybe this is a moment to do it, or how to recognize those patterns and things of that nature. So, man, I think the gospel is when we are rehearsing that and we are embodying that, it puts us in position to love our kids well, love our kids as God loves us, and it puts them in position, one, to not only believe the gospel, but to be changed by it.
Yeah, we talk about the gospel is a life-changing truth. It's powerful, and we believe in the power of the gospel. But it's not just text that we read. And oftentimes, I think the thing we have to remember, too, is especially, when our kids are young, it's hard to understand that text fully because of how deep in theology it is. But the gospel, if we believe in the power of the gospel, then we should believe that there's power in the ways that we live out the gospel in a way that our kids can tangibly understand that beyond just text in the Bible, but we're living the truths of it in a way that they can see, they can model it, and like you said, it's something that they can relate to.
Yeah, because the Pharisees had the text, didn't they?
Yeah,
they had the text down pat, but they didn't understand the character and the heart of God, the why. They missed it, and because they missed it, they missed everything.
Yeah,
they missed everything. So, the gospel frees us up to parent in a way that God intended.
It's good. Yeah, well, Bruce, this has been a privilege just to get to talk with you today, and love what you've taught us today and shared with us. If you're listening to this podcast, we hope you found this helpful as you go along your parenting journey. And if you did find it helpful, we would love for you to leave a little review there, subscribe, and share this with your friends. That the biggest thing that does is we don't want to promote the name of Bell Shoals here. We don't want to promote this podcast, but we want more parents to be able to find the help that they're looking for.
Absolutely.
So the best way that you can do that is by reviewing, subscribing, and sharing that so more parents can find help along the way. But we're so glad that you chose to join us today, and we'll catch you next time in this podcast, and we'll see you